the biggest thing I learned right there is to make things happen, you got to get outside your comfort level and grind your ass off.
Welcome to episode 123 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that is a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, always the admin items we need to cover. If you're watching us on YouTube here, you can see at the top hand corner, it says The Route, it says at The Route Sports. That's our username on all social media channels. So that's Facebook, Twitter, all the traditional ones, Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff, but LinkedIn as well, right? So this is a sports business podcast. I'm sure a lot of you listening have an account. Maybe you want to grow your network, you want to start, or you even just want to further it. Connect with me, connect with guests, connect with people that engage with the post, because it's kind of a great way to kind of, build that network even more. So take the time to do that. We're also posting clips on all those channels as well, so it could be cool to just see what's out there. And additionally, if you're listening to this, obviously you're supporting podcasters, is appreciated. But if you take the time to follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars, whatever else you can do on those platforms, it's much appreciated. We're on 10 audio platforms, like the big ones: Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, so on and so forth, but YouTube as well. YouTube, we're underneath the White Whale Marketing YouTube channel, so White Whale MKTG. And we have the Route playlist with all of our episodes that have been live, which I believe has been about 63 episodes now, so check us out there. So take the time to do that. Much appreciated. Allows the podcast to grow a little bit easier. With that done, we can now get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has not only worked for top brands such as Reebok, the Montreal Alouettes, but who currently holds a position, which I was telling him before we got on the podcast, it made me realize, hey, I should not be an accountant. I should definitely be working in sports marketing. So the current global sports marketing manager at CCM Hockey and board director at Football Canada, Dale Williams, welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Hey man, how's it going? How you doing, Chris?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for coming on. And as I mentioned in the introduction, I'm at the very least very excited to kind of hear more about your route.
No, for sure. Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. No, I'm happy to talk about it and, kind of give my little bit of a journey to, where I started to where I am now. So, I mean, I guess, the love of sports probably started when I was like 6. Started playing sports when I was 6 years old. Started out with the traditional soccer. Did that for a couple of years, and transitioned to football. Then played volleyball, played basketball. And then so always had a love of sports. And, I don't think that I ever thought that I would work in the sports industry because, like every other little kid, I thought I was going to be the next Michael Jordan, but probably 7 inches too short and probably 300 pounds too heavy. But, we always have those aspirations. But I think for myself, when I really thought that, I really wanted to work in sports was, I think, when I worked in retail. So, growing up as a kid in Winnipeg, had jobs at Foot Locker, at Forzani's, at Champ Sports, and through there became a really huge sneakerhead. And, my wife's currently, not here, so she doesn't really know how many pairs of shoes I have in the closet. I try to hide those. But, I think that's when I became a sneakerhead, and being around all these large companies like the Nikes, the Reeboks, the Adidases, the Converse, really started to kind of whet my appetite for the opportunity to see, what could I do in sports? So I guess my route really started when, I was at the University of Winnipeg, and I had coached basketball for a lot of years, and, coached at the provincial level, but also had the opportunity to be the assistant graduate coach for the men's university team at the University of Winnipeg. So did that for about 5 years, but all the while, working in retail. And then had the opportunity to have a job, summer student job with the NBA. So, which was kind of unreal. So for that summer, I worked for the NBA out of Toronto, and we did a tour called Dribble and Drive. And essentially, we took a F-350 and a 24-foot horse trailer with a sport court and drove that bad boy from Toronto all the way to Vancouver and then back to Halifax. So that whole summer, I was able to see the whole country by car. An unbelievable experience for someone at 20 years old to be able to do that. So, that kind of really gave me my first start at looking at the business of sport. And my role there was, PR. So, I did a lot of the breakfast television interviews and was the animator for most of the event. So that's really kind of when I got my taste of sports.
Yeah, that's so. How does that first role come about, right? Like, I know now. Let's use LinkedIn as an example. You see a job posting for the NFL, NBA, NHL. I think it says within the first 18 hours, you'll see 400 applicants. So clearly, it's a tough role to get in. So how did you stand out?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I lucked out. So what I did is at the time NBA worked with an agency, and I actually had worked for that agency, and I had worked on another brand which we're all familiar with, or most of us are familiar with, and that would be Molson. So I worked out as a Molson summer student doing an event, and it just happened to that this agency that I worked for had struck a partnership with the NBA, and they knew that I had a basketball background just from coaching and playing and being at the university level. So to be honest with you, I lucked out. I just happened to, have that background that they were kind of looking for. But I think what kind of sealed it is because we know how many basketball players are in Canada. So I kind of figured out how do you get noticed? It can't be just a CV. It can't be just, trying to call connections, because at the time I was 20 years old. I didn't have any connections. So it was, how was I going to stick out of the crowd? And shockingly enough, the way I did it, and I remember it so clearly, it was 2000, and you had camera phones, but it wasn't really where you could just literally do a TikTok or a reel and kind of, express who you were. So the way I did that is I actually got my buddy who brought his video camera in, and we literally went into the gym, and it was the first time that I ever did a video CV. So sat down, talked about who I was, talked about everything, and then threw some fun into it. I consider myself to be a high energy guy and to have fun and not take myself too seriously. And I'll never forget, we sat there and we videotaped this thing in the gym. And then I started to do skills on the basketball court. And at the end of it, which is the funniest part, the camera was on me and I was at center court, and I literally was like, hiring me for this job is just like making this shot. It's easy. And I literally threw a half court behind my head, but you could see the terrible editing because we had to stop the video and then put the camera at the hoop and then watch it fall through. So a little bit cheesy, but a lot more fun than it was. And, he had an iMac, and we burnt that thing on a CD. And we sent that CD out to the NBA, and luckily it worked out, and I got a job.
Wow. Oh, that's unreal. And like, you just talking about the editing, I remember my first marketing class, we were trying to make something for GoPro, right? Like a sample one. And I was the one trying to do all the trick shots, right? Using a GoPro, and we were trying to do a football shot into a basketball hoop. And the amount of times I was throwing them, we finally hit, and then we just need to put the camera after underneath. And yeah, like just hearing stuff like that's just so funny, but so organic too, right? Because you can show your personality rather than just having a white page with all these black text on it as well. So no, that's awesome. And I guess going from that, maybe that gave you more of a sense of, hey, what it's like working in sports marketing, maybe more specifically. Where did you go from there? Was it you started meeting people on that tour specifically? They're like, hey, that's how my next role came about, or how did you end up from there?
Yeah, man, it was a crazy thing. So I remember the first time we were in the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, and that was kind of our first kind of dry run. So we were doing that, and then I was fortunate enough that I had met some people. So luckily enough, we were actually sponsored by Reebok. So as you can imagine, you're a 20-year-old kid, you're working for the NBA, and then you find out that you're sponsored by Reebok, and now you're getting free clothes. Like, you're getting clothes, you have to wear Reebok. It's like, man, am I like an influencer before influencers are analytics, because I get all this stuff and I'm sponsored, and it was just an unbelievable thing, because you're sitting there going like, when you're in it, you don't really realize it. But for some reason, I was just like, this is really cool. Like, so, we would get shoes and everything. So Reebok was our first sponsor, and, we got great support from them as a partner. And every city we were in, there was always a representative there just to meet us and talk and things like that. And, it's true. Relationships are extremely precious. And, I think that in the business world, when you look at everything, it's one of those things where, cherish your relationships, because you never, ever know. And just having conversations with people and, I would say this: every time you meet someone for the first time, whether they end up becoming a boss or not, it's an interview. It's a perception of who you are. It's something that you shouldn't take lightly. And I think that if you do those two things and you can be humble, it can go a long way. So that's kind of the organic flow of how all of this happened. So when I got back to Toronto and we finished the tour, I went home. I went back to Winnipeg. Was coaching again and doing that, and then I get a phone call one day, and it's from the Eastern sales manager from Reebok, and I owe a lot to her, Elaine Ratcliffe, who was the manager at the time, the director at the time, and running that. And she called me one day and she's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And I was kind of like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, I'm good." How are things? And we just had kind of a talk, and it was cool. And then she was like, "Yeah, there might be an opportunity. Do you think that something you might be interested in?" And I was like, "I mean, sure. Like, let me know." She's like, "Okay, well, someone will be in touch with you, and we'll see what happens." So literally for 3 weeks, no one reached out to me. And I was like, "Oh man, like, did I blow this? Well, how could I have blown it? I didn't even interview." And, I had been gone for the whole summer. So I spent a lot of time with my friends, and I'll never forget this. We went out one night and we had a fun time, and I decided to sleep in the next day, and I get this phone call, and it's like, "Can I speak to Dale?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but who's this?" And I'm a little bit like, and I'm like, I'm sleeping, and I'm like, "Who is this?" And they're like, "Oh, is this Dale?" And I'm like, "Yeah, who's this?" With a little bit of attitude. And he's like, "Yeah, this is the director of sales from Reebok Canada." Ooh. Whoa. "Hey, what's up? How's it going?" So it perked me up. It perked me up pretty quickly. And, he said, "Hey, we heard some good things about you. Before everything had wrapped up, we had actually done a session for the Reebok employees where they had the opportunity to do all of the stuff that we were setting up with the sport court, and had a little mini event for Reebok employees." And then and I'd met some people there, and you have a conversation, but you don't think that it's ever going to turn into an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So again, very fortunate that happened. So he called me and he's like, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, "Good." And he goes, "We want to talk to you." And I said, "Sure, cool." I said, "I'm going to be in Winnipeg. Maybe you can come and meet me and we can talk." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." So he's like, "Okay, I'll get back to you in like 2 days." Another week and a half goes by. I'm like, "Okay." So I finally get an email from his assistant saying, "Dale, he's unable to be in Winnipeg. Do you mind flying to Calgary?" And I'm kind of like, "Yeah, I guess, sure. When would you need me to go?" "Tomorrow." I'm like, "Okay." So they booked me a flight. I flew to Calgary. I got in, I want to say at like 3:00. We talked for a bit. Shot the stuff, and then we went out for dinner, had a good talk, came back, and he goes, all right, well, I got to go. I'm on the red eye back to Toronto. I'm like, what? And the funniest part about all of this is a gentleman. His name was Tennis Watson at the time. Great man. Unfortunately, no longer with us, but a great, great man. And we did not talk once about the job. Like we just talked about life. We talked about, we talked about sports, but we didn't talk about the job. We talked about the business. And again, I'm 21 years old and I'm sitting here going like, okay, this is kind of cool having these real authentic conversations so young in my career. And we get back and he's like, okay, well, I gotta take off. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm kind of like, what about the job? And he goes, oh yeah, that's right. I'm like, oh, yeah. He literally pulls out a folder and hands it to me and goes, there's the offer. If you like the offer, sign it right now and we're good to go. And I'm like, whoa. So I open up the offer. At the time, I looked at the salary and I was like, this is amazing. Not amazing 20 years later, but at that time, I'm like, you know what? Whether or not, I was a little bit like, oh, should I do it? Should I not? Because now I have to move to Montreal. I don't know anyone in Montreal. And it was the first time in my life that before acting hasty and be like, yeah, I'm going to work for it. And then signing it, I had to actually take a second and be like, this is a big deal. Yeah. And I remember that before I left, my father said to me, if they offer you the job, you need to take it. You need to try something new. And maybe you need to leave and kind of stand on your own 2 feet. If you fall down, it's okay. You can fall down back home and you can come home, but you need to do this. So right then and there, I signed the contract, and that was a done deal. And I became a Reebok employee, and went back home and started to get everything organized.
Wow, that's crazy. That just kind of came about, right? Where like these phone calls, flying to Calgary, having a conversation, and then right, kind of just changes everything just out of the flip of a hat, right? That's wild. And then how did that kind of progress from there? And well, to be honest, I actually have another question, if you don't mind. Prior, you're talking about you're a sneakerhead, and then you're kind of sponsored with like Reebok. What kind of shoes did you get? Did you get anything that was of interest?
Well, at that time, we actually had the opportunity. So we used to get obviously our clothing and all that stuff. But when it came to footwear, I was a huge Iverson fan at the time. Yeah. So we would get like Iversons, and then we'd have access to like, the Question, because the Question was kind of that first shoe. So I wore mostly like Iversons. Like I had, the Question, the Answer 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes I would take my paycheck and I would go buy, a pair that we might not have gotten, or so it was really cool. Like, like I said, before I even started at Reebok, I was a huge Iverson fan. So the fact that I get to, rock Iversons all the time, why not?
Yeah. Did you keep any of those by any chance, or did you get rid of them over time?
Over time, I didn't keep any of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess kind of getting back to that a bit more about Reebok. Obviously, you make that huge jump.
Yeah.
You flew from one city to the next, and then you had to move. How did that go about, right? Because I think that's something that's pretty, I would say pretty important maybe to kind of talk about, because a lot of people that are listening to this podcast are typically, university students in sports business, or people that are about to start their career in sports, or they're, they kicked it off and they're trying to see where they can get their footing. What's that move like? Because obviously sometimes in sports with, teams everywhere, brands everywhere, for you to progress, you need to make those moves. So what was that move like to Montreal, and how did you deal with it?
It was tough in terms of I didn't know anyone in Montreal. But it was something that I had to do. So, I make the move to Montreal. I get an apartment. I make sure I'm close to the office so I know. It was a long process. I mean, I hopped in my 4-door Sunfire and drove from Winnipeg to Montreal, and with all my stuff in there. And I remember, driving with my dad, and he flew back from Montreal when we dropped me off. And when you're driving there, you have all these conversations, and you're talking about like, what are you going to do? How are things going to progress? Like, what's going to happen? And I'll be honest, it didn't hit me until I drove my dad back to the airport and he took off on his flight. And then I walked out and I was like, man, I'm in Montreal all by myself and I know nobody. Like, what is this going to be like? And I said, bury yourself in your work. This is probably the best opportunity I have to make, I don't want to say make a name for myself, but to start to build my career. No girlfriend, no friends in the city, no distractions. So I grinded. Every day was a 10-hour day. Even if I was done what I was doing, it was the ability to think of, okay, what's the next thing that I can do? What would be the next project that we can, work on? When I took the role that I had signed up for, it was kind of a hybrid role. So it was a tech rep. So basically, I went to shoe stores and did technical presentations on our product. And then I took care of some of our, I guess we want to say, lifestyle stores. So at the time, I don't know if you're a huge Jay-Z fan or 50, but, Reebok was kind of one of the first companies to actually, make a shoe based on musical artists, right? So we have that G Unit shoe and that S. Doc Carter, which I'm kicking myself because I literally do not have a pair of either anymore. So I'm still kicking myself about that. But you go through that opportunity of having that role, and that's what I did for probably about 2 or 3 years, and it was good because, like, again, I didn't really have any distractions. So, I would read up on sneaker culture. I would read up on, marketing trends and things like that. Funny enough, I would actually try to figure out how to present the best way, because you're sitting in a room with a bunch of all these young kids and they're looking up at you going like, what is the coolest thing about your product? Why is your product better than Nike's product? And the fun part is you have to start to think and go, is it better or is it more different? So I always try to present as, I'm not going to say that we're better than Nike. We were, but I'm not going to say that the product is better or different. We cater to different needs. You're able to tell those stories. I think the biggest thing is that when you're doing those pictures, when you're doing those presentations, you're really looking to differentiate yourself from the Nike tech rep, from the Adidas tech rep. So I really concentrated on making sure that I had a good presentation style, an energetic presentation style, a style where people would be like, I never really thought Reebok was cool, but Dale's pretty cool and his energy is kind of awesome, so I'll give it a try. So I guess to say all that is that no matter what your product is, you are a representative of it. And if you can drive energy and get people to follow and listen to what you're saying and get them excited, yes, they get excited about the product, but they get excited about the person who's delivering that narrative.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of a great way to say it, right? Because everyone's kind of one-upping, but at the end of the day, it is, to an extent, sure, there's technical details, but it's still a shoe, right? Like, it goes on your foot, you tie it up, and you walk, right? But then kind of maybe how you position yourself and all that's kind of a great way to think about it. And then I guess just kind of building on that as well, it was just making me think of, let's say someone's listening, right? And maybe the question they're kind of coming to mind is, hey, does that mean if I want to have a successful career in sports, does it mean I have to move, right? Let's say they live in Toronto and they have all these different teams around there. Would you say there's still things they can do to, I wouldn't say avoid the distractions, but still make a name for themselves, right? Because you're saying, you didn't know anyone, you didn't have a girlfriend, you didn't have X, Y, Z. Was that the only way?
No, it's not the only way. It's so sometimes I can be like the squirrel guy where boom, and then I could lose the thing. So for myself in my situation, not having friends to start helped. Because I like to have a good time as much as anybody else. So if you're focused and you know what you need to do and you can block out the noise, you can do whatever you need to do. With regards to moving, 20 years ago, I probably would have said, yeah, you probably have to move. But we're in a whole new future now, right? Like there's hybrid, there's remote. It all depends on what the company or what the role is and what the what the wants and needs are of the company. As a perfect example, I have an employee who lives in Toronto, and she works remotely. She comes into the office once a month for about a week, and we are able to get our FaceTime and things like that. So hybrid has allowed us to be able to do that stuff. I always say, and I'm a little bit of an old school cat, is that if you can be in the building, it's always beneficial because you have the ability to connect with other people that are a part of the business. You have an opportunity to spend more time to, if you have a question, you can probably just get up, walk down, ask a question where, someone might not be available on Teams. And I'm not saying that hybrid is detrimental to your career. My opinion is that if you can be in the building and shake as many hands and get in front of as many faces, it's beneficial to you, because at the end of the day, when you work, we talk about influencers and we talk about how they build their brand and things like that, and that's what they do for a living. When you're working with a company, you still have a brand of yourself. Like if you're trying to aspire to get to that next level, you almost have to build what's your internal brand and what is it a part of your brand that can separate you from people to try and move to the next level. So it's funny that we talk about branding and influencers. You're trying to be a branding person yourself within your own office. And that's what I've kind of tried to do throughout my life, is that, I have no filter. I'm straightforward. I believe in transparency. I'm probably a bit too transparent. But I'm a high energy guy who loves what he does. And my role in my role is to make sure that I'm putting my employees in the best position to succeed, but having fun while we're doing it. Guys, we're working with kids. We are working with athletes that get paid millions of dollars to play a child's game. Like, we're not saving lives. So you know what? If you're going to work in this industry, have some fun while you're doing it. And I think you have to pick your spots. Yes, you're going to have to be serious in corporate and maintain budgets and make sure you achieve your KPIs and things like that. But isn't it a lot more fun to just do it while having fun versus always being bogged down? So I think that being in the sports industry allows you to have that ability to have it both ways, to kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, and to be honest, when I kind of my one of my first roles in sports, one of the directors said almost exactly that. He was like, "Hey, relax." He's like, "No one's gonna die from what we're doing." He's like, "No babies are dying from your marketing or you hosting the press conference." He's like, "Just enjoy it." And I was like, "Wow, that's kind of a great way to think about it." Because sure, you can get stressed, you need to get things done. There's a deadline, but like you said, there's no babies dying, there's no people. It's have fun, right? So I think that's a perfect way to go about it. And I guess getting back to more about your route specifically, how do things transpire from there, right? You got into Reebok. I have your LinkedIn open here, so I'm trying to follow along with that.
There's a lot, eh? There's a lot.
Yeah.
So after the tech rep thing, and being a sales rep, we then we were then joined forces with CCM.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, CCM had come under the Reebok umbrella, and then the birth of Reebok hockey. So I never actually worked on hockey at all. My main focus was football and basketball. And we had a division that was called the sports license division, and we started out with the position of sports marketing coordinator. So that position kind of came up. I wanted that job right away. I was like this tech rep who was doing all this stuff, and I was like, no, like this is what we're doing. Like, this is where I need to get into. And luckily I was fortunate enough that I had some people that went to bat for me, and that comes back to being able to shake those hands and develop those relationships and develop a trust where someone is willing to go out on a limb to say, this is the person that you need to hire.
Yeah.
So I was extremely fortunate to have people that had my back and that kind of pushed that, he would be perfect for it. So, went through the whole situation, went through everything, and was named sports marketing coordinator for the sports license division at Reebok. So again, the majority of my role was with the CFL. So I worked directly with the CFL. So the role there was working with the equipment managers, having the ability to work with the players, try and tell some stories around the players, and create a little bit more intrigue, doing POP, coming up with campaign strategies, and servicing. And there was a lot of things that I had to do within it, but again, I'd rather be a jack of all trades than a master of one. And I think you need to be very agile in this day and age. I'm not saying that if you're a master of one that you can't have success. You can. But if there's something that you can be agile and find other ways to be able to contribute to the business, it's always a benefit.
Yeah.
So for myself, I did that role, I want to say probably for 5-6 years. 5 or 6 years. And it was fun. Again, I'll probably say the word fun a lot because I have friends who literally text me all the time and go, I hate you. Like, you get to do what I want to do. But I think that within the sports industry, especially when you're dealing with athletes, it takes a special kind of person. You can be a fan, but you have to be a fan behind closed doors. You have to be able to do your job. And sometimes it's hard. I've had the opportunity to meet an Allen Iverson, and I'm like, oh my God, and what do I want to do? I want to get a picture. I want to shake his hand. I want to talk to him. But to have success within that role is you actually can't do that. You have to not be starstruck, because then what that does, that builds your credibility. And then also that gives a level of respect to an athlete who's like, okay, this guy understands that, I get this all the time. I don't want to get this when I'm dealing with my brand. I want to be able to sit down, do what I have to do, and then move on next. So that's kind of where that role went to. So I spent 6 years within that role, and then it was time for the next challenge. And we were going through some transitional stuff at Reebok. We were purchased by Adidas, and then I made the decision to jump to the next thing. But I can tell you that the 10 years that I had at Reebok were amazing. Like, I got to do so much stuff. I think more importantly, though, I learned so many things from people. I probably learned a lot more of how not to do things, and how to be able to be a leader, and how to be able to, read a room and act. And that's what a lot of it is. People hate perception, but the reality is that it's a big deal. So making sure that I was perceived well, but it was a great 10 years being at Reebok.
Yeah. One of those questions I kind of had from that was, well, even just what you just said there, I was trying to write that down quickly, because just almost learning about what not to do is just as important, right? Learning from other people's mistakes or even your own. Just want to jot that down quickly for even myself. But what I find so interesting, especially about sports marketing, right? What I do, I kind of was like, hey, I want to try this out. I want to work with athletes and help them. But I remember when I was in university, I was speaking to people, right? I was trying to grow my network. I would ask teams, I'm like, hey, would you ever have a position where a specific employee of the organization would be solely responsible for player branding, marketing them, ensuring their social medias, or even just how they position themselves makes sense? I remember those teams were like, oh, no, never. Like that wouldn't make any sense. A couple of years later now that I'm kind of doing this, they're like, hey, like, I think we would maybe have that in the future, right? So it's funny how things have shifted. But I was curious, what was it like marketing athletes like in the early 2000s, and even maybe like even the last few years, it's obviously changed, but what was that like at Reebok, and how did that play within your role?
Yeah, so for me with the CFL, because there's 8 teams, it was more about the team than it was the players. Obviously, we had a couple of marquee players that we used for advertising. I think that was the era of let's get them, let's shoot them in our product, and then let's put them on POP, let's put them in stores. And I think that was kind of the start of what sports marketing was. You take a picture of someone in your product, and then after that, you just kind of leave it at that. There was no real storytelling. It's evolved from where it was back then to here. So at that time, we were kind of telling stories, but it was really about validating the product with these pro athletes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And is that something now where, like, even let's say through social media, right? Like, let's say when you go on Instagram, you see someone's profile, it can almost tell a story, right? Like who they are, like what types of things they're doing. But a lot of the times, like one of the examples I'd like to use is sometimes you see athletes and they have 3, 4 pictures, they have a blank, avatar or whatever you want to call it, and it's them, their mom, and them playing hockey, right? So is that something where even from like a hockey brand, is that something you're positioning? Because I know that must be, yeah, that must be an interesting way to tell a story.
It's funny that you say that. So I think when you're dealing with athletes, it depends on the sport.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very big cultural thing, to be 100% honest with you. You see that basketball players are a lot more out there. Football players are a lot more out there. They're building their brand. Hockey, a little bit more reserved. I think that trend is changing as I've been at CCM. But remember, back then, you kind of had Facebook. Then you and even with Facebook, you wouldn't be able to look at your full stories, where Instagram now you literally click on that and you see everything, where Facebook you're like scrolling down to this picture and this picture and this picture. It wasn't as prevalent at that time. Obviously we've seen the shift right now, and I think from a marketing standpoint, you have to tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find a way to get your consumer to understand who you are as a brand while working with your athletes. Your athletes are a representation of your brand, and you want to make sure you're working with the right athletes that have the same morals and values. And I don't tend to call them sponsorships. So one of my big things is I don't do sponsorships at CCM. I do partnerships, and there's a huge difference. You can give money to anybody and get your logo on the ice, but how do you really truly amplify your brand by using all potential levers at your disposal? So, when you're working with an athlete or you're working with a team, it's what assets can we bring to the table to bring value, but also what are you going to bring to the table so that we can amplify both of our brands and get to the next level together. So that's a big thing for me. Those days of sponsorships are done. It's about partnerships and having one.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think there's like been like, let's say, partnership directors that have come on the podcast and we've touched on that as well, right? Where sponsorship sounds like, hey, we're just gonna give you this money and that's it, right? That's a transaction, right? It's just a one-way thing and that's it. But nowadays it's much more, hey, this is what we're gonna do for you, this is what you're gonna do for us, and we're gonna come together in the middle. So yeah, that's awesome. And I guess maybe kind of moving on from Reebok, just referring to my LinkedIn here again, right? You moved on to the Montreal Alouettes. How did that role come about? Obviously, Reebok was working with the CFL, as you were mentioning there. Was that something where all your roles just were like a natural progression, one from the next?
So after working for Reebok and working with the CFL, I met so many amazing people at the CFL, really good people, and having the ability to work with the office out of Toronto, but working with all 8 teams individually. Again, you build those connections and you build those relationships. And it was actually the first, I guess the second time I was approached. I guess you could say my first foray into Reebok, I was approached as well, but this was kind of the second one, but that was at a different level. The ability to have someone call you and be like, hey, we know you understand this business, now come work for us. So I made the decision to walk away from Reebok, a tough decision. For those who know me, I'm an emotional guy, so my last day at Reebok was ridiculous. I was totally good until I actually got into my car and I had to drive away. But I was excited about the new challenge, and the newest challenge was to become the manager of retail marketing for the Montreal Alouettes, and then that definitely evolved into a director position. And I think this was the biggest challenge that I'd ever had, because now I was handling all retail. So my responsibilities were purchasing, were the marketing behind the product we were buying, to operations and setting up our stores in the stadium. At the time, ecom ecom was starting. So I had to help build a full transactional ecom for the Montreal Alouettes, because previously, before that, we worked with a third party. So a third party would fulfill all of our product. And then we decided to bring everything back in-house. We all know why. It's always nice to control everything that you guys do. So, boy, that was a busy job because we were constantly rolling. So I remember I started that job, I want to say, on May 1st. Yeah, I want to say on May 1st, I kind of started that job, and it was, okay, what are we doing here? So I remember that we literally had to find a warehouse, take 6 U-Haul trucks, pick up all the inventory, bring it to a warehouse, build shelves in a warehouse, and have it all functional. And we were able to pull that off in 9 days.
Wow.
A lot of Red Bull and M&Ms, I'll tell you that very much. But we pulled it off. We had a functioning warehouse. Then the next step was to be able to get to the stadium and set up the stadium. So we had roughly about 7 stores in the stadium, do that. And then going through all that, kind of forgot, I got a staff. So we had to hire like 30 staff. I had to hire a coordinator and a game day manager for retail. It was a lot. But again, the biggest thing I learned right there is, to make things happen, you got to get outside your comfort level and grind your ass off. And not only did my team, we grinded, we grinded hard. And, they have that saying right now, grind now, shine later. And I think that with the results that we produced in the first couple of years with the Alouettes, we definitely did shine. We broke sales records. We were doing different things. We went into women's where licensing is always about guys, jerseys, hats, and nothing that was flattering for women. So we were like, hey, you know what? Women like sports too. And we really tried to push that. We live in Montreal. Montreal is a beacon of fashion. It can't always be just big, colorful logos. So we really have to think, how can we be a little bit more fashionable, because we're a lot different than the rest of the country, but incorporate women's business within that, where she can wear a t-shirt to the game and then not feel to go down on Crescent Avenue after the game and not feel like someone's going like, oh my gosh, look at that shirt. So, we did a lot of market research on how we were able to build that business. And, the first year we did 20% over last year. And then the following year, we beat that year by another 27%. So we figured out that we found a secret sauce of what we had to do to be able to do that. And, opening up an e-com, we had to then I wasn't a huge computer guy, but oh my God, I learned my ass off with how to work a back end, how to make sure inventory was tied into that back end with what we had here, making sure that, were we having the right product assortment online versus having the right product assortment at the stadium. There's a lot of things that we had to learn on the go, but man, we had a really good time doing it. Like we didn't sleep a lot, but we had a really good time. And, I spent 3 seasons with the Alouettes, and it was, that is what really catapulted me to getting to that next level of 1, e-com, 2, how to buy product, 3, how to run an operation at a stadium, 4, how to manage staff and a staff of over 30 people, once a week. And then also how to navigate your relationships within the building while doing all of that. So, because it's not just that, it's you're working with the partnership guy who wants to get product for his partners. Then you're working with the president who wants to make sure that we have the right product assortment and everything for all of our big partners who are going to be in the loge or in the box that night. So being able to do all of those things really allowed me to not focus on just one thing. And that's when I kind of that's how I started to become a jack of all trades, to be able to learn everything.
Yeah, no, and to be honest, I love like how that discussion kind of came up because I've always had so many questions just regarding that. Because, for example, when I was working at Atletico, we're a professional sports team. You have your classic T-shirts, licensing deals, etc. And I understand with licensing you have to work with a specific brand, but I didn't understand why we had this generic blue T-shirt, huge logo, and it was like $50-$60. And I was part of the team, and I was like, I'm not wearing that, and I got it for free. I'm like, I'm not wearing that. Like it's awful. It's $70 or $60, and it feels horrible. And I understand you got to meet those quotas or whatever else. But then when you're talking about that beacon of fashion, kind of maybe wearing or having clothing where fans can wear elsewhere and kind of be proud of it, right? Where a lot of the times too, and not to maybe harp on the CFL, I would say even maybe other Canadian leagues as well, you have these hats with these horrible graphics rather than just kind of a simple logo, kind of clean cut where you can kind of wear it throughout the whole week other than just that, let's say that game day. So I was always kind of curious, and maybe with your experience with that role, I kind of wanted to know, why can't they have more, let's say, like seasonal collections to an extent? I understand you have your licensing products, but why not partner with like a local fashion brand or even maybe have a contest within the organization, have people come up with different logos or seasonal collections where it's $20, $30, $40 worth of apparel and people maybe can switch it out depending if it's winter, summer, spring, because not everyone wants to wear like these huge logos that are generic material.
So yeah, I guess what I would say to that is it's coming. You're starting to see it more and more. If you've been following us, we just did a collaboration with Supreme. Supreme is one of the most iconic worldwide brands, and we did a collaboration, did a hockey jersey with them. We did a crazy collaboration with Psycho Bunny. I think you start to see that more. I think the shift between, I remember back in the 90s, it was all about basketball jerseys and hockey jerseys and the way that it was worn. And it was definitely perpetuated culturally, right? Like if you looked at any hip hop video, it was all like guys were wearing hockey jerseys, and it was And obviously that we became a little, I don't want to say more fashionable. The trends started to change, and it became a little bit more, now it's skinny jeans, and now it's back to bell bottoms. So those trends always change. But I think the one thing is that I think you have to be able to, if you want to be able to grow your brand, how can you cater to mainstream plus your fan base, right? Because if you've got your fan base, you're good. But if you can get even a bit of that mainstream because they think what you did looks good, some people might not have known who the Alouettes were. But because we made a cool graphic, they were like, that's actually a pretty cool shirt. I would wear that. Doesn't matter to me if they're a fan or not. Would love it if they were a fan, but they still purchased it.
Yeah.
So now you start to seep into that mainstream and have ability to try and grow your brand a little bit more with someone who might not even know who your brand is. But because you took the time to try and find something that your run-of-the-mill person would purchase, now you're one step ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. And obviously, like even some of the things you're just saying there, want to touch on your experience at CCM a bit. And obviously, you have a lot of roles and experiences. Just to maybe, let's say, summarize those before we get into CCM, is that something where, for me, what the theme has kind of shown of your route in your career is kind of making yourself uncomfortable and trying new things, kind of develop those skills and even become, that master of all, right? Let's say. So is that something where you were trying to, these different roles or working for these different branches, like to learn, right? And kind of find new experiences to kind of grow from there?
Yeah, for sure. I think, when you're in it, you don't think about it, right? because you're too busy going. And I try to take a step back whenever I can and understand what is actually going around me and kind of enjoy that journey. You know, with the Alouettes, that journey was a great journey. Again, it really gave me the ability to think of all these other things that I could do and learn from. I didn't know how to code or how to put in a code in the back end for a website, but I had to learn. I had no choice. So I took the time and did what I had to do. You know, after the Alouettes kind of hit a low period. So they went in with a new president, and the president made the decision to make some changes. And that was a tough one for me. You know, people probably don't talk about their lows enough. I think that you need to talk about those lows, and I think you need to be vulnerable and to say, hey, it didn't work out this time. Was I not there because I didn't do a good job? Well, I know I did a damn good job. But I think what people need to understand is that change is inevitable. And sometimes when you're dealing within corporations and you have changes at the top, those people at the top want to have the people they trust. And I think the biggest thing is that if you're ever laid off or there's a changing in the guard and they want to change things up, you can't take it personally. I took it personally. Frankly, I was pissed off. But when I spoke to someone and they positioned saying, this happens all the time. Like, you have these corporations that change at the top. And what do they do when they change at the top? They change their executives and they change them for people that they trust. And that's okay. So it doesn't mean that they didn't trust you. It's just that they have a role to do and continue the trend of making the business go upward. And they feel that they can better do that with someone that they already know versus taking the time to understand someone. And that's okay. It's okay. You know, constantly I tell people, they're like, oh, well, you shouldn't tell people that you were let go. Why not? Who cares? If I was let go, someone's going to ask me in an interview, well, what happened? And I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to be very honest about it. At the end of the day, it wasn't like I was doing a bad job and that's what happened. It's that there was a culture change, and that person didn't feel that I would be the right fit for that new culture. And I was cool with it. So, you know, that helped me sit back and take back. And I was fortunate enough that I got a year and a half to sit back if I wanted to and do some different things. And I had a young child at the time. So you can understand my mind was going crazy. I was like, oh my God, I have a young child. I just got a new house. And now this is happening and I'm freaking out. Thank God for my wife and her calming demeanor to be like, it's okay. We're going to be fine. And, you know, she said to me, embrace what has happened now. And what is going to be the reinvention of yourself? What are you going to do to stay relevant and reinvent yourself for the next opportunity? And that really stuck with me. And to have that come from my wife, who's an extreme introvert, was like, whoa, okay. When did you become Yoda? And that's what I did. And I spent 6 months being at home, cooking, cleaning, picking up the kids, making sure the house is clean, making sure that my wife comes home to a hot meal and doing that stuff. And what that did, it heightened my ability to appreciate more, to appreciate what my wife was doing when I was working. And I think when you start to learn to appreciate things more, it opens the door to being a lot more empathetic to what people are doing. And that was the next skill that I had to pick up, was how do you be empathetic? How do you put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand how to be able to do what you're doing every day? So for me, that was a huge thing. And, you know, I moonlight as a DJ. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a full-time DJ. So I had the opportunity to play in clubs in Montreal, do my thing, have that lifestyle, because when was I ever going to have that again? So for me, it was, don't look at not having a job. Look at it as, I have this time. What am I going to do to reinvent myself? What am I going to take? Am I going to use this time and waste it? Or am I going to do things to better myself? And I chose to do things to better myself. And bettering yourself doesn't mean about going to school and taking courses and watching TED Talks and all that stuff. It's just, where do you want to become a better person and work on that? And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think I would almost say you should get a podcast because I'd listen to you all day. I'm trying to take down all these notes, and they're like, "This is just great." I think I could go for hours with you. But no, that's awesome. Like, yeah, there's so much good stuff coming out of this podcast, and it's unfortunate that like timing is always a constraint sometimes. But yeah, no, that's unreal. And I think what you're saying too about sometimes people like to, especially with social media now, it's always, "Hey, look at me, look what I've done, look at all these great accolades." And to be honest, I even find with LinkedIn, I have trouble with LinkedIn to an extent where you go on and everyone's always saying, "Hey, like my business is making $1 million now and I only ran it for 4 weeks." And you're like, wow, damn, that's fast. Like I'm not doing that. Right. And then you start having all these comparisons and, you have these lows and these ups. So you just being open about that, I really appreciate it. Cause like you said, at the end of the day, I think people are smart enough too, to kind of know, hey, like if you're saying oh, I wasn't like, oh, I decided to leave myself or X, Y, Z. People can read through that, and when you kind of just open up and be genuine about it, I just think it's so much more beneficial and it's real. Like if LinkedIn or social media, people are like, hey, like I had a tough time, and like this is why. And even what you were saying about Reebok, like learning from mistakes, I think that would be huge rather than just being like, hey, look what I did. I'm so great, right? So no, that's awesome, and I appreciate that. And then CCM, I think I told you before we started the podcast, and not to gloss over, you had some different roles, but I'm very curious about CCM because I remember when I first found out about that, I was like, what? I'm like, I didn't know that was an option for a career, right? I had a professor. He's like, yeah, I know you're into sports, but you're good at business. Just stick to accounting. You'll be fine. I was like, okay, I'll do that. But then once I started hearing about all these different opportunities, I was like, yeah, I can't live 40 years, on Excel. So, yeah, like what's the role like? I know you're talking about the CCM Supreme. You obviously get to do a bunch of cool stuff working with athletes and working with a brand within sports. So what is that like?
It's good, and I'm going to dive into the CCM for sure. I think that the CCM role definitely helped perpetuate where I was previously, which was RW and Co. And I think the natural segue to RW Co to CCM is kind of funny because I was a sports guy and now I had to actually go into fashion. So now I'm one of the few guys that are in fashion marketing in a fashion house in Canada. And I'm tasked with taking this brand and trying to create new demographics and new ways to sell fashion. We always say this: men don't follow models, fans don't follow fashion brands. What they do follow, though, is they do follow athletes and they do follow athletes' wives. That's a given. That's what they do. And we use, it's amazing how sports can just invigorate life into anything. And we used sports to build our men's business. So we knew that we were a company that was, that's where you go to get your suit when you're first out of university. That's where you get your work clothes and things like that. And we decided to use the lever of hockey to get us new demographics. So because we were very heavy in suiting, we said the only sport in the world that requires you to wear a suit to every event is hockey. Mm-hmm. Hockey is a fabric of Canada. It's embedded in the culture. Hockey is Canada. So how can we drive athletes and work with athletes to be able to drive our business in our suits? And that's where we worked with PK Subban. And we had the opportunity of working with Erik Karlsson. And then my last campaign was working with Mark Scheifele from the Jets, Johnny Gaudreau from the Calgary Flames, having the ability to work with Morgan Riley and Philip Deneau. And we were able to boost that business of suiting because now it wasn't only just grown men who were thinking about us as a suiting destination. It was the kids that are playing in the ECHL. It's the kids that are playing AAA. It's the kids that are playing that are about to be drafted into AHL. And they're going, oh, man, I can go and get suits here. Oh, this is what Karlsson's wearing. Oh, they had PK Subban. So we were able to get that full demographic of not only just grown men who were professionals buying suits, but now we're getting all these hockey athletes that are doing it. And that's what drove the business. And it was so crazy because I'd never worked with hockey players at Reebok, but I was working with more athletes in a fashion brand than I was when I was at Reebok. So it just shows how far the lengths of sports can go to, and it's not just catered to one silo of sports business.
Absolutely.
That was a living proof that it can permeate into different parts of businesses. So did that for 5 years and helped build that business. And again, if you want to talk about out of uncomfortable, I was a dude who'd be wearing a pair of Jordan 1s, ripped jeans, a t-shirt, and a ball cap. Now I'm like, okay, got to put on a nice pair of loafers, a nice pair of khakis, button-up shirt, be fashionable. And again, it was another reinvention. And I think what people need to understand in your career, you're going to go through a bunch of reinventions. Don't stop. Go with it. Just do it. At worst comes to worst, it doesn't work. Like, it is what it is. So, went through that. And I think by working with those athletes and being able to build those stories around those athletes has what's been able to have a little bit of a smooth transition into CCM where I currently am.
No, absolutely. And to be honest, I'm glad you kind of got into the RW and Co. Period of your career, because I remember that, right? Like I'm in Ottawa, so Carlson was at the RW and Co here, Subban, all those different ones. And it's funny how sometimes the brands that you think are outside of sports are the ones maybe dealing with sports the most. And then let's say one within sports is then trying to be more of a lifestyle type of brand, right? Where they almost switch places to an extent. So that's very cool. And I guess like you're saying there, that experience that you kind of developed where you're learning to build a brand, that fashion, kind of wearing a different hat for an extended period of time. How did that transition work from there? Was it your network previously that kind of led you to CCM? Was it just they came to you? Yeah.
It was definitely my network. So I had a friend of mine who had reached out and said, "Hey, they're looking for a sports marketing manager at CCM. You should apply." And I did, and had a really good interview. Again, I don't come from hockey, so I don't have hockey traditions in the back of my head. I don't have hockey culture that is a part of my DNA. What I have are ideas to help build a brand to become more fun and ultimately, I don't want to say cool, but to resonate with the mainstream and not just necessarily hockey fans, because we want to be inclusive to everybody, whether you play hockey or not. Remember, you don't need to skate to play hockey. You can play hockey in the dead of summer, 30 degrees, and enjoy the sport. And it's those things that make this sport so different than everything, right? You can't play basketball outside in the winter. I mean, you could. It's pretty tough to do. You could play football, but I don't think anyone really wants to play in 3 feet of snow in Canada, right? So where you can't play those in the winter, you can play hockey. But in the summer, it's the one sport that's extra that you can play. So you have options. So hockey is one of those sports where it's rooted in tradition, but sometimes traditions need to be tweaked. And what is the newer way of making an old tradition fun? And I believe that for myself, being in, my role at CCM, it's allowing me to come hopefully with ideas that aren't traditional, that are different. And it's no secret, hockey's been taking a shellacking over the last, almost a year. Hockey's trying to be more inclusive. It's trying to be a lot more diverse, and we're starting to see it. There's not too many guys that look like me that are working for hockey suppliers right now. But kudos to my company for not being traditional. They went and said, this guy's got the goods. This guy's going to bring a different perspective. Let's roll with him. I don't believe at any time at all that they hired me because of the color of my skin. They hired me because it's a different hire, and it's a different perspective. And I think the ability to have that base of sports, period, allows me to be able to do what I'm doing now. And my current role as manager of global sports marketing is taking our athletes and telling stories. I love telling stories. And I think that our athletes, whether it be Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, Matt Dumba, Nate McKinnon, they all have a story. And I think that if we tell their stories and we're able to connect with at least one person going, I went through that, then we potentially have a customer for life.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And that's kind of my role right now. So I work with our high-end athletes. I work with all of our athletes, not just high-end, but I work with everyone. I also handle the ability to do partnerships. So I work with our corporate partnerships and facilitate some of those partnerships that we have. And then also, kind of the last pillar is to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusivity, and making sure that we are doing programs that include everybody. And it doesn't necessarily mean just people of color. It means girls, it means boys, it means LGBTQ. We have an opportunity at this precipice right now where hockey's at to help change the narrative and to really recreate something new that everyone can be passionate about.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. And even just from what, like, the last hour we've been speaking, I think you just make perfect sense for a role like this, just the ability to tell stories and just find different ways to create that outlet. I think that's awesome. And yeah, like I look forward to just even maybe hearing from all those different, thoughts and processes you go through, and even just kind of maybe what comes out of it, right? Like what you're saying, CCM and Supreme, like making hockey. I know you're saying not make it cool, but make it, let's say, more available, right? Where maybe someone who doesn't play, whoever put on skates, they would hear about CCM or different brands like that just because it's touching areas that they wouldn't have touched in the past, let's say. So I think
I think that collaborations are huge. If your brand wants to have the ability to survive right now, you got to work with people, man. Like, it's okay to do something different. My most hated phrase on earth is, we traditionally don't do this. Like, I am tired of hearing that, man. Okay, well, guess what? We're doing things differently. You need to be relevant. And I think that, because the hockey culture is very, very deep rooted, it's taken a little bit more time. Well, take a look, man. Look at all these new young guys that are coming up. Hockey's been always about the logo on the front, not the name on the back. But nowadays, it's the name on the back that makes the logo in the front. Remember, and I'll use basketball as a perfect example, most people don't have a favorite team anymore. I mean, I do. I'm an old school dude. I love the Lakers. That's my jam. That's who it is, right? It's Lakers for breakfast, Lakers for lunch, Lakers for dinner. But now these kids are following the players. If you look at someone who follows Kevin Durant, they might have an OKC jersey, Brooklyn jersey, and Golden State jersey.
Yeah.
They like that. They may like that team, but they like the player. So if you look at the way hockey, the Zegras, all these young kids, the Tage Thompson, like, these guys are super cool, and these kids are gravitating to what they're doing on the ice. So why not amplify that and give them more about what these guys do? Not every kid is going to make the NHL, but they can aspire to.
Yeah.
They can put the effort to do it. So why not tell those stories of how hard it got there? And I know you see it all the time, and it's like, oh, there's this story, and look at how it took. But guess what? It's the hard work that's going to get you there. So our job is to find a way to tell a story that will capture you. And that's what it comes down to. And like I said, this is my biggest challenge ever. I was fortunate enough to be in Halifax a couple of weeks ago for the World Junior Championships. I literally watched both semifinal games, the bronze medal game and the gold medal game. I watched more hockey in 2 days than I have in 10 years because I wasn't a hockey guy. But that's okay. But what I did do is allow me to tap into my appreciation for the emotion and the passion that all Canadians have about hockey and that pride. And looking at that and being a part of that was like, okay, like we've taken a little bit of a step back with what's happened, but we can get back to it because the love and the passion is so much there. So to be able to tell those stories and really connect, and you're going to get them. They already like hockey. But the thing is that what is the next new thing? Who is the next guy that's got a story that resonates with me, that makes me want to be a fan of that guy, let alone finding what you can connect to with an athlete, even more for us as a brand, them accepting us as a brand because we choose to work with these athletes because of their stories.
Yeah, no, and just from everything what you're saying, obviously I've been wondering this as well for years in hockey, just kind of the ability for players to differentiate themselves or even kind of tell a story from whatever they're wearing or even let's say their skates, right? You were saying at the beginning, you're a sneakerhead. I can tell by your style, there's an ability to stand out. When do you think we're going to see that? You think in a couple of years we're going to see maybe like that orange on skates and maybe like the NBA where a couple of years ago they had all those color restrictions. They had to match the jerseys, otherwise you get fined. Do you think that's something we're going to see in hockey soon where, hey, letting players just run wild and maybe customize their skates or go on from there?
I don't have an answer for that right now, Chris. I think we will. But I'll tell you right now, we're definitely looking at all the ways that we can make this sport even more fun, because it is fun now. And I don't want to say that this sport is not fun now, and it's not. It's definitely having a transformation. But like every good thing, it'll take time.
Yeah.
It definitely will take time. But when we get there, it's gonna be awesome. Like there's gonna be so much cool stuff. Shameless plug here from CCM that you're going to see in the next 2 years. We're going to have fun with this, man, because again, I said it at the start, we work with athletes who make millions of dollars to play a child's game. We're not saving lives here, so let's have fun doing what we're doing while we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even I think recently I saw something with Austin Matthews, and I know it's a different company, Mars Blade, where he had this, let's say, teal or light blue colored skate guard or even like rollerblades as a whole. I could see something where maybe in a couple of years the skates being sold at local retailers, or let's say these different signature skates. Maybe they can't wear them at the NHL, but maybe having Austin Matthews, McDavid, different ones like that, having their signature skate available for youth, so they're still able to have fun because they don't need to abide by black and white. And I know when I played hockey, I had bright orange, so that color you had there, those are the color of my laces when I was playing as a kid. But no, that's awesome.
Sure. And we've done some cool stuff. We've done some stuff with Austin where we've done different skates for him. We did a Movember skate, but then we did a Sick Kid skate that Ryan Reynolds is wearing one of our skates right now. So there's all these abilities to do these really cool things. It'll just take time, but we'll get there. And we're gonna have fun with it. We're really gonna have fun with it.
Absolutely. Well, obviously we've had a lot to discuss, and before we end the podcast, I always like to ask each guest 2 questions at the end, just because I think it's a perfect way to put a bow on it. So, for those that listen to the podcast, I'm set. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair, singing back and forth, and think about all the good times, right? But I don't always remember. That's why I need to do this podcast. So let's say the future self is listening to this podcast, and you want them to recall this great moment that's taken place in your career so far. What's that one story that would stand out that 103-year-old Dale should know about?
We made a change in the most traditional sport ever.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure in a couple of years that change, if 103-year-old Dale's listening to this, I'm sure in a couple of years that change will be even bigger than it is in 2022, 2023 era. So yeah. And the last question, so we went into the future, going into the past, 16, 18-year-old Dale, or let's say even 21 when you're wearing those Iversons. What's something that you wish you could tell? So let's say we had a Back to the Future car, the DeLorean. We go back and chat with a younger version of yourself. What's one piece of advice that you've now learned that you would share with them where people listening could even benefit from hearing?
Be empathetic to everybody and listen more than you speak, because that's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth.
That's good. Well, that's exactly why I asked those questions at the end of the podcast, right? It's kind of a great way to just sum everything up and kind of put a bow on it. So that's awesome. And obviously, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with me. I have 3 pages of notes, so I'm just always writing down here. So it's been fantastic, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for coming on. I know everyone listening is going to be enjoying this podcast. And, for my buddy Taj who clips this, shout out to you because you got a lot of good stuff to clip on this episode. I was putting stars across all of my notes. So hopefully we see a lot of that on social media. So follow us at The Route Sports. But that's it for episode 123. Thank you, Dale, for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Chris. We'll talk soon, man.
All right. Thank you.